Before there was a United States, long before the Declaration of Independence, long before Jamestown or Plymouth, the land we now call America was home to millions of indigenous people. These were not simple communities. They were thriving civilizations with languages, cultures, religions, governments, and trade networks that spanned vast distances. Across North America, from the cold forests of the Northeast to the deserts of the Southwest, people had adapted to their environments in ways that allowed them to flourish for thousands of years. In the Mississippi River Valley, the Mississippian culture built cities with large earthen mounds, including Cahokia, which at its height had a population rivaling that of contemporary European cities. In the Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans constructed multi-story dwellings in cliffs and canyons, an architectural marvel of its time. In the Northeast, the Iroquois League demonstrated an advanced confederacy system, a union of nations with councils and a complex governance system that some historians note influenced early democratic thought in America. Life was deeply intertwined with the land. Corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters, were grown together in sophisticated agricultural systems. Hunting, fishing, and gathering supplemented diets, while trade routes connected tribes across hundreds of miles. Spirituality, ceremonies, and oral traditions preserved knowledge across generations. Each tribe had its own identity, language, and customs, yet there were extensive networks of diplomacy, alliance, and trade that kept the continent connected long before Europeans arrived. Then came 1492. Christopher Columbus, an Italian navigator sailing for Spain, landed in the Caribbean. While he never set foot on mainland North America, his voyages opened the door for European colonization. The arrival of Europeans would forever change the continent, often violently. The Spanish explored Florida and the Southwest. Hernán Cortés conquered the Aztec Empire in Mexico, and Francisco Pizarro subdued the Inca in South America. French explorers navigated the St. Lawrence River and the Mississippi, establishing fur trade networks with native nations. Meanwhile, the English began attempting permanent colonies along the Atlantic coast. In 1607, Jamestown, Virginia, became the first permanent English settlement in North America. The colony faced starvation, disease, and conflict with native peoples, yet it survived, in part because of tobacco farming, which became its economic backbone. 17 years later, in 1620, pilgrims seeking religious freedom arrived on the Mayflower and settled in Plymouth, Massachusetts. They signed the Mayflower Compact, a document establishing principles of self-government, an early experiment in democratic governance. Over the next century, 13 British colonies emerged along the eastern seaboard of North America, each developing its own economy, culture, and identity. New England focused on shipbuilding, fishing, and small-scale farms. The middle colonies produced grains and became hubs for commerce. The southern colonies relied heavily on plantations, cultivating tobacco, rice, and indigo, often with enslaved African labor providing the workforce. By the 1700s, the colonies were culturally diverse, economically interconnected, and increasingly independent in thought and governance. Yet the seeds of conflict were being planted. Britain's costly wars in Europe and North America, particularly the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763, left the British government deeply in debt. To recoup expenses, Britain imposed taxes and regulations on the colonies, including the Stamp Act and the Tea Act. Colonists who had grown used to a degree of autonomy protested these measures under the slogan, "No taxation without representation." Tensions mounted, protests escalated, and a revolutionary spirit began to stir across the colonies. These years were formative, not just in politics, but in identity. The people of the American colonies were beginning to see themselves as distinct from Britain, setting the stage for a revolution that would reshape the world. By the mid-18th century, the 13 British colonies along the eastern seaboard of North America had developed their own distinct identities, economies, and social structures.
While they were still officially under British rule, the colonists had grown accustomed to managing many of their own affairs through local assemblies and town meetings. However, the conclusion of the French and Indian War in 1663 dramatically altered the relationship between Britain and its colonies. Britain had spent vast sums to secure victory against France and its native allies, and now looked to the colonies to help cover these debts through taxes and trade regulations. The passage of the Stamp Act in 1665, which imposed taxes on printed materials, triggered outrage across the colonies. Merchants, lawyers, and everyday citizens protested, arguing that it was unjust to be taxed without representation in Parliament. Resistance quickly escalated, combining political debate, grassroots organizing, and occasional acts of defiance. The formation of the Sons of Liberty, an organization dedicated to opposing British policies, marked a turning point in colonial activism. The Boston Massacre of 1770, in which British soldiers killed 5 colonists during a confrontation, inflamed public sentiment, while the Boston Tea Party of 1773 saw patriots dump crates of British tea into Boston Harbor in direct protest against the Tea Act. These actions sent a clear message: the colonies were prepared to resist tyranny, even at personal risk. Tensions reached a breaking point in April of 1775, when skirmishes erupted at Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts. Armed confrontations between colonial militias and British forces marked the beginning of open warfare. George Washington, appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, faced the monumental task of organizing a ragtag group of militias into a cohesive fighting force capable of challenging the British military, one of the most powerful in the world at the time. Amid the chaos of war, a revolutionary ideology was emerging. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, principally authored by Thomas Jefferson. The document boldly asserted that all men are created equal, endowed with unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It declared that governments derive their powers from the consent of the governed, and that people have the right to alter or abolish unjust governments. The Declaration not only justified rebellion against Britain, but also articulated a vision for a nation built on democratic principles. The war itself was long and arduous. The Continental Army faced shortages of food, ammunition, and clothing. Harsh winters, particularly the winter at Valley Forge in 1777 to 1778, tested the endurance and resolve of soldiers. Yet the colonists were aided by foreign alliances, most notably France, which provided military support, funding, and naval power crucial to eventual victory. Key battles such as the Turning Point at Saratoga in 1777 demonstrated that the revolutionaries could challenge British forces and inspired greater international support for the American cause. After 8 years of conflict, the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783, formally recognizing the United States as an independent nation. The victory, however, was just the beginning of a complex journey toward creating a unified, functional government. The initial framework, the Articles of Confederation, established a loose confederation of states with limited central authority. While it represented an important step in governance, it became clear that the new nation needed a stronger federal system to address economic instability, interstate disputes, and international relations. In 1787, delegates convened at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. Through intense debate and negotiation, they crafted the U.S. Constitution, establishing a federal government divided into 3 branches: legislative, executive, and judicial, with a system of checks and balances to prevent any single branch from gaining excessive power. The Constitution was ratified in 1789, and George Washington was inaugurated as the nation's first president. Complementing the Constitution, the Bill of Rights was introduced to safeguard individual freedoms and civil liberties, including freedom of speech, religion, and the press, as well as protections against arbitrary government action. By the end of the 18th century, the United States had emerged from revolution as a new nation with a codified system of governance and a vision for democratic ideals. The struggles of the revolution had achieved independence, but also laid the ideological foundation for a society striving toward liberty, equality, and justice, principles that would continue to guide the country as it expanded westward, faced internal divisions, and navigated the complexities of a growing nation.
At the dawn of the 19th century, the United States was a young nation still finding its identity and place in the world. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803, orchestrated under President Thomas Jefferson, doubled the size of the country overnight, opening vast territories west of the Mississippi River for exploration and settlement. Jefferson commissioned the Lewis and Clark expedition, which traversed rivers, plains, and mountains to map the newly acquired land, document natural resources, and establish relations with Native American tribes. This period marked the beginning of a national ideology known as Manifest Destiny, the belief that the United States was destined to expand across the North American continent. Settlers poured westward, establishing farms, towns, and trade networks. Yet expansion also brought displacement, conflict, and hardship for the indigenous populations who had lived on these lands for centuries. While the nation grew in land and opportunity, tensions over slavery increasingly divided the country. The Southern economy, reliant on plantation agriculture and crops such as cotton, rice, and tobacco, depended heavily on the labor of enslaved African Americans. Meanwhile, the northern states were rapidly industrializing, with factories, shipping, and commerce taking prominence, and a growing abolitionist movement challenging the morality and legality of slavery. Political compromises, such as the Missouri Compromise of 1820 and the Compromise of 1850, attempted to balance the interests of free and slave states, but these measures were temporary solutions to a deeply rooted sectional conflict. As the nation expanded, transportation and infrastructure transformed American life. Canals, such as the Erie Canal, completed in 1825, connected rivers and facilitated trade. Railroads extended across states, moving goods, people, and ideas at unprecedented speed. Cities grew as manufacturing centers flourished, while new waves of immigrants from Europe added diversity to the urban population. Yet beneath the surface of prosperity, sectional tensions continued to rise, with debates over states' rights, representation, and the future of slavery becoming increasingly bitter and polarizing. The 1850s saw the nation teetering on the brink of disaster. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 allowed territories to determine the legality of slavery through popular sovereignty, leading to violent conflict known as Bleeding Kansas. The Dred Scott decision of 1857 by the Supreme Court denied citizenship and legal rights to African Americans, further inflaming the debate. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1960, perceived by Southern leaders as a threat to the institution of slavery, prompted the secession of 11 Southern states and the formation of the Confederate States of America. The Civil War erupted in April 1861, beginning with Confederate attacks on Fort Sumter, South Carolina. The conflict was marked by unprecedented mobilization of troops, large-scale battles, and immense casualties. Leaders on both sides faced enormous challenges, from logistics to morale. Abraham Lincoln, as President of the United States, faced the dual task of preserving the Union and confronting the moral and political complexities of slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 declared the freedom of enslaved people in Confederate-held territories, redefining the war as a fight not only for the Union, but for human liberty. The Union Army gradually gained the upper hand through strategic victories at Gettysburg, Vicksburg, and other crucial engagements, bolstered by industrial resources and greater population. After 4 years of brutal warfare, the Union emerged victorious in 1865. The 13th Amendment formally abolished slavery, marking a turning point in the nation's history. The war preserved the Union and laid the groundwork for the Reconstruction era,
though the nation would face continuing struggles over civil rights, social justice, and integration for decades to come. The Civil War remains one of the defining moments in American history, illustrating both the nation's capacity for conflict and its ability to evolve toward the ideals set forth in its founding documents. The period from 1800 to 1865 thus encapsulates a nation in motion, expanding territorially, transforming economically, and confronting moral and political challenges. It is a story of ambition and innovation, but also of human suffering, conflict, and the enduring struggle for equality and justice. These formative years set the stage for the United States to emerge as a modern nation, ready to face industrialization, global influence, and the challenges of a rapidly changing world.
The end of World War II in 1945 marked the United States' emergence as a global superpower. Having mobilized its economy, military, and population on an unprecedented scale, the nation possessed unmatched industrial capacity, a powerful military, and significant technological advancements. At the same time, the geopolitical landscape had shifted dramatically. The Soviet Union, another wartime ally, quickly became a rival in ideology, military power, and global influence. This rivalry sparked the Cold War, a period of political tension, military competition, and economic rivalry that would dominate global affairs for the next 4 decades. During the Cold War, the United States pursued a policy of containment, seeking to limit the spread of communism around the world. The nation engaged in a series of proxy conflicts, including the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, and the Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975. The threat of nuclear war loomed large, influencing domestic policy, education, and culture. The space race became a key front in this ideological struggle, culminating in the United States' historic landing of astronauts on the Moon in 1969. The Cold War shaped U.S. foreign policy, military strategy, and international alliances, including the formation of NATO and engagement in global diplomacy. Meanwhile, within the United States, social change and the struggle for equality were reaching new heights. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s challenged segregation, discrimination, and systemic racism. Leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, and many others mobilized communities, staged peaceful protests, and brought attention to injustices through powerful rhetoric and courageous action. Landmark legislation, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, transformed legal protections and advanced social justice, though challenges remained. The movement inspired subsequent campaigns for gender equality, LGBTQ+ rights, and the rights of other marginalized groups. The latter part of the 20th century saw unprecedented technological, economic, and cultural change. Computers, telecommunications, and the rise of the Internet reshaped work, communication, and entertainment. Economic globalization linked the United States more closely with other nations, while domestic debates over healthcare, taxation, social welfare, and civil liberties intensified. The 1990s brought relative peace and prosperity, yet global conflicts and domestic challenges persisted, reflecting the complex nature of an interconnected world. The 21st century introduced new challenges and opportunities. The terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001 profoundly affected national security, foreign policy, and domestic life, leading to military campaigns in Afghanistan and Iraq. Economic crises, technological revolutions, environmental concerns, and political polarization continued to shape society. Yet, the United States has remained a leader in innovation, cultural production, scientific research, and global influence.
From the early days of indigenous civilizations to European colonization, revolution, civil war, industrial growth, world wars, and the modern era, the story of the United States is one of resilience, adaptation, and transformation. The nation's journey has been shaped by struggle and triumph, by ideals of liberty and democracy, and by the ongoing tension between aspiration and reality. Modern America, like its predecessors, continues to grapple with questions of identity, justice, and responsibility, striving to live up to the principles articulated in its founding documents while navigating the challenges of a rapidly changing world. In conclusion, the history of the United States demonstrates a remarkable capacity for growth, reinvention, and influence. It is a story of people shaping land, society, and governance, of ideals tested by conflict and opportunity, and of a nation continually evolving toward its highest aspirations. The journey from a collection of 13 colonies to a global superpower reflects a complex interplay of human ambition, innovation, conflict, and perseverance, leaving a legacy that continues to unfold in the present day and will shape the future of both the nation and the world.